Welcome to the Boulder Chapter Colorado Renewable Energy Society discussion panel, which is part of our series of discussion panels. This evening we're discussing solving climate change at the local level. We have four distinguished guests, which we're extremely grateful for, so thank you very much for your time. I'm going to give a quick run through for these guys. Jamie, welcome. We haven't met, so
yeah, nice to meet you.
I just wondered that you got here. Sorry. Represents Lafayette. She's a council member for Lafayette, which has a number of roles, which includes being the liaison to the Lafayette Energy and Sustainability Committee, and the coordinator for Boulder County on sustainability as well.
City of Boulder.
Sorry, Lafayette. Excuse me. Yeah, I'll get that right and go forward. Prior to that, for Lafayette, you were actually part of the Urban Renewal Commission. You were a board member for New Era, Colorado, as well as being on the Boulder County Cultural Council, if I've got that correct. So yes, quite a distinguished, a lot of work before you got there. Marcia, here at the end, welcome, represents Longmont as a city council member. She's a computer scientist still. First and only woman named as a research fellow for storage tech, holds over 20 patents, some of which are recently done on the smart grid. So very impressive resume. Thank you very much for coming. Sam, correctly pointed out as Boulder, is a Boulder Council member. He's also president and CEO of Cool Energy, which I assume is your business. An inventor as well, with 20 patents as well to your name. Congratulations. Serves on the board of directors for Proton Power and is a co-founder of Colorado Photonics. Tom, here to my left, Tom Doyle is the chair of the ERIE Sustainability Committee, which is essentially guiding the sustainability master action plan for ERIE. Also the Colorado Coalition for Renewable Climate. I assume you work at RMI, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Leading the project management office there for the implementation of that. And previously you were senior manager at NREL. Correct. So very distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for attending. What we're going to do this evening is ask a series of prepared questions, which we've given quite a bit of thought to, which hopefully address some of the issues that everybody's interested in. The other advantage, of course, of doing them prepared is that these guys have had a chance to think about them. At the end, you can take your revenge by asking them the questions that they haven't had a chance to think about. But I would rather get through to that process. So we'll be about an hour, 55 minutes answering these questions, and then if you can save the questions to the end, that'll be great. So in no particular order, we're going to start with first question, which is, I guess, what are the largest sources of greenhouse gases in your city and town, and what's being done to address the reduction in those sources? We'll see if you want to start first, and we can work backwards from there.
Okay. Well, we don't have hard data on the relative greatness of the greenhouse gases in our community. My best guess is automobiles are first. We don't have a lot of high-emitting industry in Longmont, for which we're grateful. We probably have a fair amount of farming. We have some farms internal to Longmont. Most of them are actively engaged in sustainability pilots and things of that nature, so if they have a few methane emitting animals, we'll have to forgive them. We have a landfill within the city limits, and that's a significant source of methane as well, but automobiles are far and away the first.
So, City of Boulder, we do an annual emissions inventory, and about 70% or so of our emissions come from our electricity supply. So, part of that has inspired the discussion of municipalization, and it's also inspired a lot of policy action for us to try and get Excel to reduce their emissions and increase their renewables, and both of those things are moving forward. About 20%, maybe a little more than 20% is from automobile emissions, so transportation is number 2, and then everything else is the remaining 10%, home heating and waste emissions and so on. So we have just implemented a carbon accounting. We're trying to make it more and more aligned with kind of the international standards for doing that. And I just have to give a shout out. The reason I have my computer up here with me is we had a presentation last night by our awesome staff about our climate commitment. So this is all like 1 day old information that I'll be giving you for the rest of the evening. And that's it. And Jamie has worked on some of these projects in the past for the city.
Yeah, I wear 2 hats. During the day I work for City of Boulder, and I'm on council in Lafayette, so it's really exciting to serve both those roles. So in Lafayette, the picture is a little different. We did our last inventory in 2015, and we are pretty much a third. Transportation is our #1 source of emissions at 32%, then residential energy at 32%, and then commercial right at 31%. So we don't have a ton of commercial that's being built out still right now, as our town is still growing. So that will shift over time, but right now transportation edges out at the top. Do you want us to go into the rest of that question, or should we come back to that?
Well, no, I'm keen for you to, if you're there, let's answer the other question.
Yeah, I can.
What are we doing about it?
Okay. And just to give you a little background on the Lafayette Council, this is the most progressive and environmentally focused council in the history of Lafayette. I was elected in November, and our council, all of our goals this year, not all of them, but a majority are around sustainability and energy, which is a first. And so we're kind of, unlike Boulder, we're on the edge of starting a lot of these programs and really trying to figure out how we get to these really ambitious goals. We did set goals similar to Boulder, 100% renewable energy by 2030 and 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. We've really focused on, so far, solar, transportation, and then my focus has been a lot on working at higher levels of policy, so also engaging at the state level and trying to push our policy. So we've done some work around improving our solar codes. We got the National Sol Smart Gold designation for reducing the barriers to installing solar in residential. And then we're working on encouraging EV market growth in a whole bunch of ways I'm happy to talk about later. And then working on a lot of transportation initiatives, some very innovative. And then I sit as vice chair of the policy committee of CC4CA, which is Colorado Communities for Climate Action. Boulder is a member as well. And we really advocate and lobby. I'm down at the Capitol a lot testifying, trying to push that state level, which this year it's a little challenging, but really trying to establish the local government voice in some of the state policy work. So we just put out an RFP for our kind of roadmap, we're calling it, for how we get to our goals. So we really are on the beginning edge of this work, but hopefully we'll hit the accelerator really fast.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to hold just for a second, if that's all right. Just because we didn't really give voice to both sides of that question.
Okay.
I wondered if, Sam, you wanted to backtrack a bit and give us some views on how you're tackling that.
So we have a climate commitment that's pretty active in Boulder. We've adopted 80% by 2050 reduction, which is what the IPCC and folks recommend. We may accelerate that. As a city organization, we want to be 80% emissions reduction. These are all from a 2005 baseline by 2030. We're going to have 100% renewable electricity supply by 2030. That aligns with the Sierra Club goals. And we want to have 100 megawatts of local generation by 2030. And so of that 100% renewable electricity, we want 20 to 25% of it to come from within our footprint. How are we doing on emissions reduction? So from a 2005 baseline, Boulder's down about 13% so far. That's based mostly on the greening of the electricity supply and increased mileage of automobiles. Our city organization has done a 35% emissions reduction in that time. A lot of that is around electrification of transportation. It's around using energy service companies to address building energy needs and to improve the performance of the building. So we're very serious. If we're going to get to our 80% goal by 2030, we have to be on this kind of arc. Renewable electricity, it's Excel's grid mix right now, which is about 29% renewable, so that's our mix. And something that we like to talk about is, as far as local generation goes, between our hydro facilities, which are about 17 megawatts, and the solar that's been put in, we're somewhere in the high 40, like 48 megawatts of installed renewable electricity on our system. So we will make our 50 megawatts by 2020 goal, which will put us well on the way to that 100 megawatts by 2030. Like Jamie said, there's a bunch of pieces to this, right? So we work on voluntary programs, we work on local policy, like commercial energy codes. That's a big step forward I was happy to be able to take in the last couple of years, and shockingly nobody was out for it. The Chamber of Commerce wasn't against it or anything. New construction in Boulder has to be 30% better than the International Energy Standard, so we adopt 30% better than the IECC standard, and whenever they come out with a new standard, which I think is every 3 years, we drop ours as well. And so we are on a glide path to, by 2035, require all buildings built in Boulder to be net zero when they're built. So that's the kind of adoption pathway. We work on energy pilots. The Department of Energy funded a couple different resiliency studies. We looked at 150 homes in Martin Acres, which is a neighborhood in Boulder. What would be the best way to use solar plus storage plus backup to island that in a flood so that you could have the lights stay on in this group of houses? So we're about to get the final report for that. We've done another one at, it's a resilience center, but it's a mobility hub. So we use VIA Mobility Services, runs the hot bus that runs around Boulder, which is currently powered by diesel buses. We're installing a big bank of batteries, and we're moving to an all-bus fleet, an all-electric bus fleet there, and got a big solar system on the roof. So our goal, this will do a bunch of things at once, right? It will reduce noise, it will reduce air pollution, and it will provide us with a place that people can gather in the event of a catastrophe. And then I'll just touch briefly, we're in CC4CA as well. And I think Colorado Cities for Climate Action has 15 communities now that cover about 40% of the population in Boulder. So this lobbying organization is lobbying for state policy that helps cities meet their climate goals. Partnerships, we have a great partnership with Boulder County. I mean, that PACE program was a real selling point for us to do commercial energy codes, where we're like, you big buildings and you big consumers are gonna have to do a baseline assessment, and then you have to come down from that baseline a certain amount every 3 years, and we get help from the county at getting those businesses both the financial support and the planning to be able to meet those targets. And then the last piece is municipalization. I mean, we look with great admiration on places like Longmont and Fort Collins that have municipal electric utilities. Their reliability is much higher than our reliability is, and their ability to do things like community broadband, which tags on to their electric system, is really great. So we think there's a lot of potential knock-on benefits for that, and I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Well, first of all, I should say that I was thinking about the sources inside the city limits of Longmont, so I need to amend my answer, which is to include PRPA, which is the generator of electricity that provides power to the city of Longmont. PRPA is a consortium of 4 cities, Longmont, Fort Collins, Estes Park, and Loveland. And PRPA generates all the electricity for us except what it buys on the spot market. But, and generally that's 100%. They rarely buy anything from outside. They right now are approaching 50% renewable, but they also run the Rawhide coal plant, which is the other 50%. Essentially, they're shutting down their ancillary coal facilities now. But while that's a high percentage of renewables compared to Excel, for example, it's not high enough for us. Longmont has also adopted 100% renewable generation by 2030 resolution, and we are essentially staying on top of PRPA to make sure that they stay on it. So the things that they're committed to are, first of all, to buying renewables when it's a bargain. The change averse among the board means we should be late adopters. That's how they interpret it, and so it's a continuing struggle to make sure that they understand that if there aren't some early adopters of a technology, that it never progresses. So right now they're doing pretty well. The thing that we really need to stand on them about is that the Rawhide coal plant needs to be shut down by 2030 at the latest. And there are two reasons why they're dragging their feet about that. One is because a lot of people they've known for a long time work there. And the other reason is accounting purposes. You know, they want to be able to fully depreciate, thank you, the word was there. They need to be able to fully depreciate their assets, and that really just can't happen. We are certain that economics will force them to shut down Rawhide before 2030, but what we need to do is to keep them from making any bad decisions in the meantime. So for example, in 2025, the Rawhide plant will be due for retooling, refurbishment, very expensive. We're hoping that they will be able to, instead of doing that, just ramp the plant down, you know, use it as backup and accelerate their renewable purchases so that that's possible. What Longmont is doing inside the city limits is we are pushing them toward demand management because we feel like nobody is thinking about the third leg of the demand management's or the firming stool. You know, you can have battery backup, that's fine. You can have a network of generation sources, distributed generation, and that's fine. But if you don't also optimize your load management, then you're wasting generation and you're wasting money. So that's what we feel like the city's biggest contribution is to make, be a leader in efficient demand management. And so that's the place where we're pushing now.
Thank you. Tom, you're free to go now that we've gone back and answered the other questions a couple of times. Tell us about ERIE.
Yeah, so a couple of things about ERIE I think are really important for the audience to understand. ERIE is fairly unique in terms that the fact that it's split between Boulder County and Weld County. So we have incentives from two different counties. We're also split between United Power and Xcel Energy, so we've got incentives for some of our constituents and community and others from another utility. Our growth trajectory is pretty amazing. We're at about 22,000, between 20 and 22,000. We're looking at going up to about 40,000 in the next 10 years, so we're doubling in size. We've got some really unique opportunities there, and we're fairly young in our sustainability efforts. We just started, actually, I was able to convince the Board of Trustees to start the Sustainability Committee 18 months ago. We were now voted actually 3 weeks ago to be actually an actual advisory board. So we're fairly young in terms of sustainability. Your question specifically was about our biggest emitters of carbon, and certainly it's electricity creation, number one, but very closely followed is transportation. And so what we're doing in those areas, and I can talk more about this, I won't get into a lot of detail, but we're creating a master plan, a sustainability master plan. We've just created a pilot recommendation for the town of ERIE about 4 weeks ago. Haven't heard back whether or not they're going to take that pilot, but we've put together all the math and the numbers as far as carbon reduction and cost savings and that kind of thing for return on investment for the town of Erie. In terms of electricity creation, both utilities are doing some unique things. United Power's got some great efforts around battery backup for their solar, for that part of the community. And of course, we know Xcel's doing a lot in terms of reducing, not enough, but doing a lot in reducing carbon there as well. In our master plan, we're making a lot of recommendations in terms of community solar to reduce the carbon footprint for electricity creation, and we're getting a lot of support there as far as residential solar. So I won't repeat what some of the other folks are saying. We don't have measurements specific to our greenhouse gas. We're hoping to get to that point, mature to that point shortly.
Yeah, thanks. That's actually a very complete answer. The next sort of question around this is really about measurement to a certain extent. And Sam, if it's okay, I'm going to start with you for a second. To phrase the question in specific terms, if everything that you listed would run to completion, would it actually achieve the goal that the city has set out? Are you on the right trajectory? In other words?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's why. So because electricity generation is the single biggest chunk, if we can't either get Xcel to 100% renewables or have them allow creative programs that let us get there. They plan to get to, we'll see how the legislature and the PUC treat this, but if they get their way and all the side deals that they want, they claim that they can get to about 60% reduction by 2030. So I was one who sat in negotiations with them when they were proposing a settlement last year with the city of Boulder to have our municipalization effort go away in exchange for something, some kind of agreement. And my point to the president, David Eves of Xcel in Colorado, was how do we get to 100%? You're getting to 60%, you'll make that commitment to us, we'll support you at the legislature so you get all the good deals that you want, but how do we get to 100%? Is it community choice aggregation? Do you let us run our own, because they didn't want us to have any form of utility. We said that's a deal breaker. So if we have a Boulder utility that sits alongside yours, how can we make it such that we generate electricity in our footprint, whether it's waste to energy, whether it's biomass to energy, however we choose to do it, solar plus batteries, how can we get to 100%? And have this work for us so that we're not paying extra. So we talked about a sustainability enterprise, sustainability utility that we could create within the city, but they said essentially there's no way we can guarantee you a path to 100%. And we said as a council, we're not interested. So we have to keep doing this to have a credible shot that we would be able to do that. But we have a plan that gets us to the 80% emissions reduction by 2050 that includes specifics around electrification of transportation, greening of the electricity supply, and moving off of methane as a source of heating fuel. So the key to that, of course, is air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. You know, how can we get to that? So the presentation last night by staff was literally the pathway to 80% reduction, and it's, you know, step by step, phased in over the years. The commercial energy codes help, you know, net zero new buildings help. So it is certainly plausible. We have charted out a way to get there. Whether we can actually get there or not, there's a whole bunch of ifs, but we're working on it pretty hard.
And it sounds like that the measurement of that is something that's absolutely forefront of the minds of the staff that you're referring to that work for the council.
Yes.
Yeah, for the city.
Yes, I mean, it's taken quite seriously. We have a new staff member who one of her primary responsibilities is to run this and to make sure that as new best practices come online internationally, that we're adopting those. The one thing that's difficult, and this is not really well modeled internationally yet, is how do you handle carbon emissions from consumption?
Yes.
Okay, so clothes, chairs, furniture, food, house. So there's a chunk that we expect is about 40% of our emissions that is not being strictly accounted because there's no international standards for how you do that, because there were emissions over here when it was produced, there's emissions in between when it's transported, and then who's responsible for those emissions? Do you have the businesses doing the manufacturing be responsible, or the consumer who's creating the demand be responsible? So that's an open issue in carbon accounting everywhere.
In the world.
In the world,
yes.
Yes.
Jamie, you seem to resonate very strongly with that particular one. The reason I'm asking the question about measurement is over the last couple of years, the Sierra Club, amongst others, has been quite successful at encouraging cities and other organisations to essentially commit to either a net zero or carbon reductions. The challenge that comes up all the time is, where's the plan? How do you measure whether that's being effective, whether we're on target for it? So you guys being, representatives of your municipalities, I thought it's a reasonable question to say, how are you going to measure it and how's it going?
Yeah, and right now that is really our only tool to measure it. I mean, I did, way back in grad school, did a lot of carbon accounting work, and it is really, these inventories are the best way we have to measure it. They are deeply flawed. I mean, they're built on assumptions. We get some reliable data, and it's mixed with a lot of assumptions. And when you leave out the consumption piece, how accurate of a picture is it? But it is kind of the best we have right now. Yeah. And so what, as communities, we just need to monitor the international standards. The positive part is we're all flawed in that way. Every city is facing the same barriers to how to measure it. And so we're all equally not doing a great job. And so as those standards start to evolve and we incorporate into our measurements every year, hopefully we'll get better at it, but it is a struggle.
In the things that are in your control, are they being measured adequately, in your opinion?
That's a really good question. We get pretty good data on electricity use and consumption. Vehicle miles traveled is also an estimate, but that has come a long way in its accuracy. So I would say for our major emission sources, we can measure it pretty well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it depends on how much time and attention you put into it, right?
Sure.
Because the more resources you put into it, the more fine-grained you can get.
How much money you have to hire the consultant
right.
that does it.
And how often you do it, if it's annual. I'll just show you a graph. This is the specific plan that our staff has come up with to take us from where we are today down to 80%. And the different colors are the different flavors of reduction. So you've got the electricity is the big one here, but there's also building energy consumption and transportation. So I just wanted to, in response, that there is a plan. But if you're not measuring frequently, you can't be sure that you're meeting your plan.
Marcia, is there anything? Yeah.
I do have some things to add. We are at the beginning of everything, because for the last 10 years, we had a city council who would not spend money on sustainability. So they wrote a sustainability plan in 2010, and in 2011, there was a municipal election and progress against it stops. So we are beginning again. The only measurements that are really going on in the city of Longmont now are things that the staff managed to do out of city budget without taking them up to the council. But nevertheless, they are at the beginning of some pretty good programs. There are a number of old abandoned wells in Longmont's city limits where we can control it. And we are already beginning, don't have the data out of it yet, but the city is already beginning to install measurement devices near those wells to make sure that they are properly capped and abandoned as opposed to improperly capped and abandoned. We are pulling out the abandoned flow lines and gathering lines, so that is underway. And we have done a pretty good job with negotiations to prevent any new drilling inside the city limits, which is a good start, although it's not everything. We don't think we're going to be able to prevent some companies from accessing their mineral rights via horizontal drilling from outside the city limits. And so that's the next target area for installing instrumentation for detecting methane leaks, because if we can detect methane leaks associated with those horizontal shafts, then we should be able to be in a stronger position for preventing additional horizontal drilling under the city.
One thing I want to add for ERIE, and this is for all communities just getting started, one of the programs that I think helped us get off the dime a little bit is a Partners in Energy program from Excel. And again, they actually looked at all of ERIE, not just the Excel part of ERIE. And it's good for setting a baseline, beginning to understand, particularly around electricity creation, which is obviously their focus. So in terms of vehicle miles traveled, I think that's a critical one and much more difficult, I think, to get your arms around. But I think that Partners in Energy program at least got us started, helped set a baseline, and that was our first step.
That's great. This is going for a one-word answer, if possible, from each of you. Do your respective municipalities share data and share how you're measuring and share your plans, given the location? I was just curious.
We would if
we had it, we would.
Yeah.
We share with Boulder County
Right.
a lot. There's a lot of
Yeah.
interaction with the county and the city.
Yeah. Just a thought. Okay, probably a slight change of tack really about moving on to kind of incentives and support. Putting those two things together really in the interest of time. What support and what incentives are offered really to the community, and how's it working?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, we have some fairly long-standing, and the programs are really more for social justice than they are for carbon reduction, but nevertheless, we do have incentives for replacing your methane burning furnace with something more sustainable, etc., that have existed in the city for a long time. The city is setting an example by turning its fleet to more and more electric vehicles. So that goes on. We don't have any measurements of total vehicle miles driven in the city. So we haven't even begun that particular fight. We are going through, the most important thing I think is that we are going through first a land use code and then a building code update. The land use code update is going on now, and we are doing several things in that. We're increasing the allowed density in the city and putting in incentives to reduce the amount of water use, either with xeriscape or that sort of thing. When we get into the building codes, which we have not done, it is the intention of the council and staff, but I can't claim that it's done yet because we aren't in that phase yet. But it's our intention to incentivize the building of all electric planned unit developments, and also incentivize the reclamation of neighborhoods that have a lot of carbon use, all gas neighborhoods, and to both reclaim the land, reduce the number of I don't know how to explain it. We're encouraging a model of development that is more of the patio home model instead of the grid model, where everybody drives right up to their house and has a double garage in the house. So encouraging more walking, less land for water-hungry uses, and again, less or no methane as a fuel for home
That does
consumption.
sound, as you said earlier on, that you're just starting on that journey. There's quite a long laundry list of things you're going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very
well,
clear.
yeah. And so the accomplished part are the density improvements and the reducing requirements for green space.
And that's part incentive then and part mandate. If it's under building code.
The density is mostly a mandate.
Yeah.
The green space, frankly, it doesn't need to be mandated because the developers don't like it either.
Okay.
So
Makes sense. Sam, why don't you give us your view and maybe also just summarise how much of that is incentive versus mandate in terms of supporting, if you can think to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of what we do is mandate. So all the energy code stuff, well, I mean, I'll talk about a little bit of incentives, but the energy code stuff is all mandates, right? So it's all mandates on development, and we look at what that cost adds to, what the cost adder is. It was pretty shocking, when we did the first adoption of the 30% better than IECC, our building chief inspector worked with the development community, and the estimate was 2% added to the cost of the building, right? And that's a one-time cost that gets spread over the life of the building. And so because technology with heat recovery ventilators and so on, all the different flavors of efficiency improvement continues to get better, we aim at 2 to 3% every time we do one of these things. So it's a mandate, but it's not one that's a 20, 30% cost adder. We also have the first carbon tax in the nation that was voter approved. There's other carbon taxes, but ours was approved by the voters. I think we used that to begin the Energy Smart program that's now the county. I don't know if we fund out of that, but we collect this cap tax. It goes to pay some salaries, but it also, I believe, we contribute to the county's incentive program. Is that right? Do you know?
Now, yep.
Now, yeah.
Originally with grant funding and now cap tax. Basically.
Right. So that's
and
an
incentives, rebates.
Right. And so that we contribute to the county, which then hands back out to city folks who are doing all of those programs that you heard about before. We do have, and that's been very effective in the city. The Energy Smart program, I mean, the city's savings is 16 million kilowatt hours a year and 3,000 businesses advised within the city footprint, and that's with a lot of help from the county. We've given $750,000 in solar grants over time.
That's true. Yeah.
And brag here, we're a gold solar smart community like Lafayette, and COSIA has given us a platinum solar friendly community for trying to make sure that we are making it easy enough for the installers to do their job. For a while, I don't think this is true anymore, but for a while we also rebated 15% of the sales tax that came for any solar system that was installed. I think that program is gone now, but we did it. And now we require, here's a mandate, all of the marijuana grow facilities to essentially buy RECs for there. And they also, to the extent that they're buying RECs and not actually doing it, they have to pay a penalty to the city. Most of them do that. So we have this energy impact offset fund that we're now collecting funds into. And one of the ideas that we discussed last night is when Excel pays, their incentives for a solar system, what they're essentially doing is buying the rights to call it green energy, and they're counting that as part of their portfolio. And because they're paying so little to homeowners these days as part of their incentive package, we're going to think about the city actually giving an equivalent incentive out of the Energy Impact Offset Fund, and we will keep the RECs. And so it will count legitimately towards our both our renewable energy goals and our carbon reduction goals. So, and then, there's some others. There's an electrification pilot that we're going to run where I believe that we'll do bulk purchasing. So people who want air source heat pumps, if we get 500 of them lined up, we're trying to get 500 people lined up for this electrification program. So I expect our staff will be coordinating some bulk buys for things. So,
do you see that bulk purchase, and that's a general question, as being a big piece of future sustainability planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing another round where we're aggregating a bunch of buildings, right? And we're going out and saying, if we can do all of these buildings at once, what kind of break will you give us, ESCO, on the work that we're doing? So I think it's always helpful. The county's done some of this as well. I mean, the bulk purchase stuff is fantastic. And I want to put in a plug for the county's e-bike program. I've got an e-bike now as well, and it's totally changed my view on this. And so you get, I forget what the incentive is, but it's like 15 or 20% off buying an e-bike. And I would say go test ride his e-bike afterwards, because they're super fun.
I think the bulk purchasing, I think, is absolutely key. It's a win-win-win. Municipality does the marketing and pulls together the customers. It gets commitments from the customers. The vendors, obviously, that you sign up with, get the bulk purchase, and that's important. And of course, the most important part is our environment definitely benefits from it. So I think municipalities really need to look at the bulk purchasing power of that organization, of the municipality itself, and look at where the demand is. And again, it depends on the maturity of the municipality itself. I mean, even a very simple conversation around e-bikes, that could be something that would certainly provide a town like Erie with some significant benefit. So that I do think it's the way of the future, for sure. Yeah.
Jamie, do you want to?
Oh, no, Jamie can. I have something I need to say, but Jamie, go ahead. It's your turn.
Oh, okay.
It's your turn.
Yeah. So we do not have a lot of mandates yet. You know, the typical trajectory, certainly, that Boulder has followed was many years of voluntary incentive first before those mandates were really pursued. I think we're running out of time for that, quite frankly. And so while we do a lot in Lafayette to promote a lot of the incentives available through the county, we don't have a carbon tax. You know, that's something else I'm trying to explore, is how we get a funding source for these programs out there, because we just don't have the same kind of budget to do our own programs and our own incentives. So that also makes me think about, you know, I'm exploring some code updates right now to start looking at easing into that mandate world. We do have a really great green business program, but I get especially excited around the incentives we're looking at around low income. Social equity and all of this is something I'm really passionate about. And we've been trying to do a lot of innovative transportation incentives. We tried to pass a community-wide eco-pass 2 years ago, helped run that campaign. It just barely lost, so hoping to bring that back. Not sure exactly when, but we're going to talk about it soon.
You got RTD to price one for you?
They did not. We did our own estimate, and that's what was on the ballot. They wouldn't price it out exactly for us until we had the vote, and I think that's part of the reason it went down, because folks weren't. It was about $30 a household, which is unbelievable. What a steal for an unlimited bus pass. But yeah, a year, but still. And so we're working with RTD now that we have more data in Lafayette to see if we can get a hard price on that. And then we did a MyRide. So RTD now has these prepaid fare cards. And so the county ran a grant program last year to come up with some creative incentive ideas. And this was an idea I submitted before I was elected, to do a giveaway of these to help drive behavior change rather than just one-time passes. And so we gave away hundreds of those. So we're now trying to look at how do we incentivize the folks who haven't used them yet. And then something I'm really excited to announce, and I don't really think this is super public yet, but we are about to launch a pilot program for on-bill financing of energy efficiency retrofits for low to mid-income folks in Lafayette. So this is a pilot, I mean, super small scale to see if it'll work, but it's a partnership between the city, which will use our water utility to do that payment, and then Energy Outreach Colorado, and then an organization called Funding Partners, who will administer the loan program. And so that to me is super exciting, because when I bought my house, I couldn't even afford at the time to upgrade my furnace to the most efficient one. That upfront capital to me is where a lot of this we have to look at, you know, especially in communities like mine where we have a larger low income population than say here in Boulder. We have to look at that upfront investment and try to me, that's a big role of local government, is how can we make that easier? So I'm really excited for that program and hoping to launch it much broader in the future.
Well, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
So in terms of transportation, Longmont took a different approach. We pay RTD $250,000 a year, and the internal bus lines are free.
I know, I'm so jealous.
I know, we're really proud of that. We hate the buses that RTD gives us, but we're proud of the program in terms of social justice. So afterwards, I want to figure out how to get the specs on the electric buses that you've got, that you're using in Boulder, because that's something that I ran on, is let's replace those horrible buses with something that is smaller, electric, and more agile, so that they don't become rolling roadblocks, causing the internal combustion cars blocked behind them to sit there emitting more while they're idling than they otherwise would have to. So again, that's a program that is halfway through, but providing free rides for people. It's about tripled the ridership, but we don't have good metrics on that either.
Reason to drive?
Yeah, no reason not to drive.
RTP.
But I want to cede my time to you, Sam.
Don't spread that.
I wanted to ask you a question, and you can have the rest of my time to answer it, on the subject of your mandates. Because you talked about, reduction in building efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Boulder City doesn't have that much capacity for new construction left, does it? So are those mandates applied to all permitted work? So if I replace my heating system, it has to be according to the mandate? How does it work, and how much of the ongoing building in the city does it really apply to?
So the commercial energy codes apply eventually to every building over 20,000 square feet, period. Existing buildings. So we're not talking about new builds. That is for existing buildings, commercial energy codes. The buildings have to get more efficient.
Right, and that was my question. When? Does a repair trigger it? Trigger the mandate?
No, it's
what triggers the mandate?
Time. The passage of time triggers the mandate. So for the biggest buildings, like Ball Aerospace, you have to do a baseline. So you have to do a baseline energy assessment, and then you have to come up with a plan with our plan coordinators for how you're going to make those buildings more efficient over time. And so those biggest ones are based on where they started. So how much better they have to get is just an over time thing. For new builds, so it depends on how you look at this. Per our zoning, we could build 6,500 new housing units. We could build enough space to house another 45,000 employees, which would be a nightmare because that would be 110,000 in commuters in Boulder instead of 65,000 in commuters. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is shifting that to where a lot of the currently zoned commercial space could be mixed-use development, which includes housing, because the last thing we want to do is create more demand for in-commuters. It's not only bad for quality of life and air pollution, but it's bad for the environment as well to have those people commuting. So you're asking about mandates. All of our rental units have to meet something called SMART regs, okay? So we consider those a business. You're renting out a unit. And so those all have to meet a certain energy consumption per square foot. And so we passed this in 2010 or 2011, forever ago, and we gave, landlords were freaking out, man. It was like tons and tons of screaming. But so in order to accommodate the screaming, the implementation phase-in was like 8 years. But that comes due this year. And so with the exception of the non-compliant 5% or 6% of rental units, we've got 94% of our rental units are meeting our standards. So, again, that's not without cost, but the improvements will get amortized and passed on to the residents, but they'll get lower energy bills. Right, so it may be a push for the residents or maybe a benefit to the residents, but overall we end up with lower building emissions in the sector. So we're not afraid to use mandates. It does cause a lot of back and forth with various constituencies. We have not done this for basic home ownership. So, the rental stock is now, which is a little more than half of our stock. So if you look at the business emissions versus residential emissions, businesses are responsible for about 80% of emissions in Boulder, 75 to 80, I forget what the number is, and residences are 20 to 25. So we've taken that 20 to 25% and made 55% of that highly energy efficient. And then we have a Green Points program. So if you scrape a house or you build a new house, there's another set of requirements that you have to follow, very kind of out of date and clunky to use. But so for residential construction, there's again another set of mandates where you can pick which of them you want to incorporate, but you have to get a certain score. So all new construction, all existing commercial, and all rental are pretty much covered by our building energy regulations.
I think what's really interesting is listening to you all and understanding kind of where you are in your sustainability maturity, I'll call it. It seems like the more mature you become in sustainability, the more you can mandate. And I know certainly for ERIE, we do very little in terms of mandating. Building codes, I think, is kind of the place you all start because it's easy, right? You get commercial and residential energy, and there's your mandate. What we think hard about in ERIE is we look at kind of what drives the community in terms of incentives. And we have this, again, this interesting split I discussed earlier. We've got one group that is really interested in return on investment. Show me how I can save money. I don't care about being green. I just care about saving money on my electric bill. And we all know that sustainability is becoming more and more of a easy thing to quantify in terms of return on investment. And then we've got the other side of the group that's just like this. I just want to be green to be green. I want to measure carbon. I want to measure my carbon footprint. And it's important to me. And you know what? I'll pay a little bit more for that, as well. So understanding your community and understanding what is important to them. And if you've got the kind of separation that we do, that's critically important, and it also makes it much more challenging. So it's interesting to hear where Boulder's at. It's interesting to hear where Lafayette and Longmont are, and we obviously are trailing that in terms of our maturity and sustainability. So you begin to see that you can begin to mandate more and more as time goes on and as you kind of mature through it. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think the thing about that that's so important is communication and education, because you know, I would have thought that our chamber, which is very active on development issues, they're out for everything, but when we passed that commercial energy codes, I would have expected to hear some pushback. There was not a representative of the business community there, and they certainly knew this was coming, because I think they share the values of the community, which is that we need to do this. And in the long run, those really big institutions, it's going to pay them back, right? Because they have long time horizons. So, and if they can get an ESCO in to handle the front end expense, so they're not having to do the capital outlay, then they're like, normally we would fight this, but at the end of the day, we don't think it's going to hurt us very much. So, let's save the political capital that they've got for something else. So you're exactly right about needing to know your community, and the Boulder community pushes us to focus on this. Politicians that get elected to city council in Boulder really need to be able to talk about this subject. It's important.
And I found it, staying with knowing your community in terms of Lafayette, you'd mentioned kind of the lower income, and you really do need to focus on that part of the community.
Otherwise we won't get there.
Well, exactly, and I find from the studies and research that they are absolutely getting left in the dust, and there are little slivers of hope for the lower income, but we're still not focusing on that enough. We're going to find that in ERIE once we could take that next big step forward, the way that Lafayette has. And I want to also kudos to the Green Business Program in Lafayette. It's something that we're looking at doing in ERIE as well. That's where the return on investment is so critical, going into a business and saying it's not just about being green, by the way. That's critically important, and we need to hit fast forward on that, but it's also about saving money. And it's I'll say it's an easy thing to start to show how you can save money in some of the most basic areas of a green business program. So kudos to
I have an interesting
Well, I'm gonna hold it for a second because we're coming up on 8:30. We've got one last question. I'm gonna try and get you guys to answer in about a minute each. And really, it's just a quick recommendation, if you like, to citizens and people who live in your municipality about what they should be doing, what they should be focusing on as individuals to combat climate change locally. And then when we've answered those questions, I think it's time to give the audience a shot at asking you unprepared.
And the biggest thing is public transportation, and it's the biggest excuse we hear is it's inconvenient. And guess what? Yeah, it is. And we need to get our communities beyond that, that 10-minute walk to the bus and that 10-minute walk to work once the bus drops you off. And I understand that it doesn't work for everyone. I get that. But certainly putting pressure on your employer to help with the EcoPass, certainly in your community on the EcoPass. But inevitably, when I'm on the bus, I see it's underutilized. That's just my perspective. They're underutilized, but I just think that is the single biggest thing we can do. Yep.
Oh, you stole my thunder. I am such a bus advocate for the social equity, again, implications of that. And the truth is we are not, especially in East County, going to get more service until we have more riders. And so I am constantly trying to think about how to get people on the bus. So really challenge yourself. Can you do it one day a week? That's all I'm at. Like, can you really just figure it into your life so we can start building that demand? And then the other thing I'm going to mention, and I'm just going to use my spot up here to get a little political, we have not been able to make progress at a state level on a lot of these issues because we lost control of the Senate by 1 seat. And to understand what that has done to our progress in climate as a state of Colorado.
You should probably clarify who we are.
Oh, I am sorry. I shouldn't say that. The Republican Party, and there are actually really great Republicans in the Senate on climate. However, every climate bill that has come over to the Senate has not been brought to the floor for a vote because of leadership. And so they have the Republicans do hold a 1-seat majority in the state Senate right now, and we have elections this November, and we just need to swing that 1 seat to see amazing progress on a lot of these issues we care about. And so I cannot morally talk to anyone about what we're doing as a city with climate without encouraging you to get involved. ColoradoResistance.org is a great resource of how to target your efforts into some key races around our state. We have a couple right down the road that you can help out with. And then I just wanted to put in a quick plug for Jim here, if you want to raise your hand, Jim. He works with Citizens Climate Lobby, which is working on passing a nationwide carbon fee and dividend program. So again, get involved. This stuff is political. And so I'm just going to use my time to say that. Happy to talk to you more about it afterwards.
So if I was to summarize that, use the bus and get involved in state politics.
You got me. Perfect. Yep. So that's my jam.
Well,
those 2 things.
I would say get involved in city politics.
That too.
And the reason I say that is, I was lucky enough to go to the conference parties in Bonn in November and represent Boulder at the Subregional Leaders Summit. So it was the first time that they had acknowledged governor, mayor level people and had a special session for just this group of sub-regional leaders, and Jerry Brown was there and Arnold Schwarzenegger was there. It was a really interesting event. Arnold Schwarzenegger said, if somebody tells you they want to emit poison into the air, you say, F you. I liked it. But
T-shirt.
Yeah. And there's an editorial in the New York Times today about this subject, about how things, when the federal level is lost entirely, the state level is pretty locked up, as Jamie said.
For a little longer, not much.
Get involved with the city. Get ERIE the political support that people need to be able to make changes. I mean, give every one of us the political support, because that's all we are, right? We can bring things forward, but if there's not the political support to do it within the town, it goes away. And so, like, the municipalization effort started with a bunch of activists. I worked with those activists. We passed this measure in 2011. I got appointed to planning board, and then I ran for council when Excel tried to kill it in 2013. So local activism is important. It works, and you can see and touch the impact that you have, as opposed to when you vote for Hillary Clinton or maybe you voted for Donald Trump. I mean, you can't really see and touch that as easily.
Okay.
I think that Longmont's approach to getting people to reduce their individual carbon footprint is A, make it possible, and B, make them want to. So the thing that we're engaged in now, and the flood of 2013 actually made this easier for us to do because we have to remake big pieces of the city anyway just to put it back together. But we have a walkable, bikeable grid plan that is on our current capital improvement program and will be completed in the next 2 years so that you will be able to get on a protected path from almost anywhere in the city within walking 2 blocks or biking 2 blocks or less on a street that is not highly trafficked. And then you can get onto the paths and go, and it's a big incentive. And if you go to Longmont and look at the new branding for new businesses, they all involve a bicycle. And I'm seriously, I mean, I had a lunch in a brew pub called Cycle Hops today. So it's a serious next brand for Longmont. You can forget about that other hand.
So is the advice then, if I got this right, bus, transportation, state politics, local politics, and on your bike?
You gotta make them wanna.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And it works both ways. I've got a story like that about mandates, and I know it's a second minute, but this is important. We did a resolution in the council that says we're imposing a 10% mandate. The staff has 2 months to study and come with a plan, and all the real estate developers in the city came to the table and said, you need to do this in the code so that I can fulfill your mandate and stay in business. And they had some of the most creative proposals you can imagine for how we could change the code so that they could build market houses that fit our top tier of affordability, and so that they could build their heavily affordable units more easily because of concessions that the city would give on green space, which don't tell them, but we were going to do that anyway because green space uses up water.
Right.
So,
Makes
you know,
sense.
we want to be a Xeriscape branded city anyway. But the point is mandates will yield unprecedented levels of cooperation if they know they can't get out of it, you know.
Makes sense. All right. So, guys, thank you very much for that. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left, and it's an opportunity for the audience to ask somewhat unscripted questions, if there are any. 1, 2, so gentleman in the blue shirt, your hand went up first, so let's start there. I'll try and...
Question for Sam. Sam, you mentioned ESCOs, energy service companies, several times. What is the main way that the city tried to engage in that sector, or how did you encourage the business community to pursue those relationships?
Well,
I'm just going to, sorry, so the question is how to encourage the business community to pursue those relationships with the city, is that correct?
And or did the city engage in that sector directly themselves?
Yeah, and did the city engage in that directly? I'm going to repeat those because otherwise we'll never get them on the video, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the city organization engages with ESCOs. So pretty much all of the energy efficiency improvements that we do and some of the solar that we put on our buildings has been done through ESCOs. An example is we bought the hospital site, Alpine and Balsam. We decided to keep one building that existed there. And so we put an RFP out, selected Ameresco. Ameresco's come in and done a complete building kind of retrofit and recommission. So, and then the way we encourage our business community to engage is these new commercial energy codes. As we advise them on, you know, some of them have the savvy already, right? They would use ESCOs if they were going to do something like this on their own. But if they're being required to, we just remind them that that's something that is a pathway to getting the financing up front and sharing the savings. So it's the city organization, and to some extent, I bet the county also, if businesses come in, you probably educate them on ESCOs.
Yeah, PACE.
Yeah, PACE, right.
Somebody back there had their hand up earlier on. I think it was you. What was your question?
So you talked a lot about transportation being a big component and that we really need to get people using the public transit system. So what are your thoughts on rideshare? Because I know there's several other larger cities that are talking about the more that this rideshare is growing, you're seeing people pull away from that public transit, which is in turn going.
Yes.
Just for the sake of it, so the question is, how do the cities feel about ride sharing, and is it in some way competing with public transportation?
Yeah, I just saw a presentation on this, and there are some unfortunate trends that go along with ride-sharing companies. Nationwide, they're seeing an increase of vehicle miles traveled because of those services. I personally feel that they do hinder our public transit efforts, and that, again, there's social equity implications to that. And so, I'll take any transportation solution out there. I like EVs, but I think we still need to drive people to public transit. I think that's really important, and yeah, that's all I have to say about it.
I think I would look at it that a little bit differently. I don't disagree with what you said, but I do think that there's still that, and I'm going to call it an inconvenience factor. I don't mean, gosh, I have to walk 10 minutes to the bus stop. I'm talking about those people that have to do 3 different transfers to get to work, and it takes them, it used to take me 35 minutes to drive to work, and now it's taking me an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half out of my day. And I think we need to think about that as a rideshare as a potential solution to those kinds of situations. But in the free market economy, you can't say, sorry, you can't do rideshare because you're 10 minutes from a bus stop. So there's there is some kind of a, there's a happy medium in there. Someplace I'd love to investigate more.
Yeah. I just wanted to add on that. But what's happening, like I'm in Denver, and the bikes you can rent are more costly than taking the gas, for example. Somebody. So I don't know, like in that situation as a civilian, what can I do? Like it's like 2 times at least more costly to take a bike.
Okay, so the point you're making is that it sometimes costs more to rent a bike than it does to take an Uber. In fairness to Denver, I think they've recognised that, by the way, and are addressing it. But it's a very good point, nonetheless.
There's a lot of really interesting conversations happening about the city's need to what they're calling regulate the curb. And so as these ride hailing, and I do think there's a difference between like ride sharing in a van or, some of these coordinated carpools and like Uber and Lyft, where I do think it's just replacing another single vehicle trip. But there's really a need for cities to engage with these companies are using public right-of-ways, they're using our curb, they are sometimes blocking bike lanes, they're blocking transit stops. And so, I think the really premier edge of some of this regulation is how our city's dealing with these companies. And we need to really start thinking proactively about that and prioritizing the modes that are really important to our community.
Should I take another question, or do you have?
No, I would like to make one more remark as the contrarian on this subject. I think that within the next 4 years we will see such disruption in transportation that we shouldn't be spending all our brain capital on it now because it's a transient problem. And I'll take all bets. Okay?
That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
I agree. Young lady in the corner.
So continuing with the transportation and making people to want the public transport, as Marcia, she gave an example that internal services are free in Longmont. So why can't we have that model throughout Colorado and maybe in the US? So maybe all over the world, if we put public transportation for free, how big of a challenge will it be? And will it weigh more than the environmental benefit it will have over the pollution cost that we have? So why not we implement that?
So
I agree. So the question is, why can't we implement free public transportation everywhere? Not a new question.
I mean, if they can afford $250,000 and if it can bring people to public transport, and as we already mentioned that utilization of public transport is very less. So
public transport isn't free anywhere in the world. I mean, if you travel to a big city like Washington, D.C., you have to buy your card. Operating expenses are real. And we have an RTD tax that we pay, but that RTD tax goes to do things like, buy new buses, replace buses, bus maintenance. Somebody has to pay the bus driver, and somebody has to, all the things need upkeep in some way. So you don't really want to make goods free necessarily. You might have very supplemented fares for low income people, which I think is completely a legit thing to do. And it's a city's decision if you want to have part of the network be free. What we do in Boulder is a little different. The inconvenience that you talk about with public transport, one of the big things is headways. How long do I have to wait for my transfer to come? Right. And so we pay RTD extra out of city funds so that they run buses more often on the most popular lines. So we've taken a different approach than Longmont. We haven't said these will all be free in this circle. We've said we're going to try and make it more convenient for you so that what you've paid has more value. If you do it. And we very much would like a community-wide eco-pass. We can't get RTD to give us a price, because if they give us a price, we turn around and go to our voters and say, I don't know, head tax or parking tax, and it would pass here with flying colors. It would pass, 2 to 1. And so if we could get RTD to think a little bit more logically about how to price something so we can pay them for it, our community would almost certainly do it. And so the roadblock, they almost killed the EcoPass program this year. Yep. We had one of my fellow city council members, Mary Young, was in there fighting tooth and nail to keep them from taking this program entirely away. It's the most convenient program that you have for RTD, because it's essentially like if you could have an EcoPass for $60 a year, right? Now it looks free to you, right? You've prepaid it, and now I can use this as many times as I want. And so I think that's the solution, is having the city pay for it, you pay part of it, and then for you, it's good for a year.
I think that the taxation question, I think, is really interesting because it's a double-edged sword. And I do believe you're right, it would pass in Boulder. The other communities, it will not. And I think part of the argument is, I don't use it, why do I have to pay for it? The other side of that is, I'm paying for it anyway, I might as well use it. And that last incentive, I think, is curious to me, because it's one of the things that if it does pass in a particular community, I think you will find more of the latter, which says, since I'm paying for it anyway, I'm incented to go use it, which is a really curious perspective.
So if it's okay, I'm going to stop the bus conversation for a second. Other conversations, questions?
Sure. So what are the largest barriers at the state level to cities adopting their climate goals?
Didn't hear the last word.
So what are the largest barriers at a state level? Correct, to adopting
to the city
to the city's goals.
The regulated monopoly utility model is the single biggest barrier. It disincentivizes distributed generation. It disincentivizes, competition. Like everything about the model, it sucks. And so, anything like community choice aggregation, as they're trying to implement it in Illinois, I think is considered by many clean energy activists to be kind of the premier, evolution of the regulated utility model. So if our climate goals are, if electricity's at the top, then you really have to be able to do something about that, or all the cool stuff you do in transportation just isn't going to matter. So do you let a single monopoly utility own all generation and move at whatever pace they and the PUC agree that they should move? Or do you unleash the market and let the market drive this? Because if it was up to the market with solar and wind priced as they are, and there was competition, it would be great. So in Boulder, if we have a muni, our goal is to be a mini balancing authority, fundamentally, where we don't care if somebody inside our footprint orders power from somebody else. They're going to pay us for the wires and the cost of the wires and the cost of the balancing and the cost of their intermittency. But as long as that all works out as a decent business model, we just manage it, because we don't need to be in the power sales business. We need to be in the grid operation business.
I think maybe not a close second, but certainly a second is the lack of investment in transportation in the larger transportation picture. I think that's also something that is continually hamstring local communities.
I have a different answer than that. I think it is the thumb on the scale that COGCC and the state have in favor.
You're going to have to clarify that for your audience. COGCC.
All right, sorry. The oil and gas industry has a stranglehold on both the state legislature and the regulatory infrastructure that the state of Colorado has. The state of Colorado preempts local control for municipalities in favor of the oil and gas industry, and the regulatory agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which is really a bogus name because they're not interested in conserving anything except the profits of the industry they represent. The playing field is tilted at about this many degrees right here, and it handicaps Longmont in controlling its air quality. It surely does that in ERIE. You know, you folks are way more victimized by it than we are. It keeps us from regulating our emissions inside the city. It does an amazing amount of things, and it is the oil and gas industry preemptions.
So a lot of things. Let's get to work.
Gentleman in the green. Mike.
I have a policy question, and it is, could true cost accounting be used to incentivize the right behavior? So if you're not having to pay out, you're doing the right thing, you're paying it down, suddenly you have every incentive to do the right thing. And if you want to hold on to your nasty bad habits, you can if you want to.
Interest. So the question is about true cost accounting, whether or not an adjustment to the way we account for things would incentivize us to do the right thing as opposed to the most expedient thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean,
absolutely.
Emissions trading schemes for SOx and NOx are one example. You know, in my company, I was just doing an analysis of environmental benefits, and
we've got about a minute.
Yeah, and I'd just say one more thing. And there are papers out there that do that say, you know, for air emissions, what is the human health cost? And they have a way they do it, and so then they put a price on carbon dioxide, SOx, and NOx. And
I think that's the answer we're trying to get. I mean, we need a price on carbon.
Yep.
Well, I just have to say, Boulder and Longmont have such radically different distributions of wealth, affluence, ability to act. If Longmont tried to do that, everything would stop and a bunch of people would be crowded out of the city because they can't afford, they don't have any margin in their economies, in their personal economies. So we can't say, all right, you got 2 years to get rid of that methane burning furnace. Our businesses don't even have that much margin.
No,
yours do.
No. I think the citizen climate lobby approach is an interesting one. It would have to be implemented at the federal level. It's a carbon fee and dividend. So you can also do income qualification for that as well. But the money that would be paid in comes back out to the citizens. And so it would be something where if somebody used less electricity because they don't make as much money and they're not consuming as much, they would pay less, but they would get a dividend that would be equivalent. So in other words, they might actually end up better off. Talk with Jim about it. He'll explain it to you.
We do the benefit without the rates, so our rates are structured so that people
I'm going to have to.
Subsidy in advance.
We are under somewhat of a promise for the use of this room that we actually leave it at a certain time. So I'm going to have to wrap it up. Listen, guys, thank you so much for an excellent panel discussion. I really appreciate it.